My expression of grief is to go into it and feel the feels and ask the hard questions and yell out loud. For Craig, grief was quieter. It took a different expression.
For me, it was just a feeling of emptiness. You see the finish line, and then all of a sudden, the road disappears. It was just not knowing where to go next. I can function for a while, but I'm ignoring it all. Then it just hits me like a ton of bricks.
Our beautiful two love languages clashed, and we needed to make room for each other's way of grieving.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection.
And finding joy.
Even in the struggle.
And welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan. So glad that you're here. And today we have some very special guests, Tara.
It is always an honor to have guests with us to hear a different love story than our own.
Yeah.
And today we're hearing from Craig and Jennifer Sakata.
Yes.
They are some amazing friends and people we've had the chance to meet. And Joe, one of the things we've said about our love story from a piece of art we have is that every love story is beautiful, but ours is my favorite. And I would say every love story is beautiful, but I like theirs too. That's the second piece of artwork. So today we have a chance to hear from this very special couple.
Yeah, we're so glad that you guys are here today. Thanks for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you. It is such a privilege and an honor to be with you too.
We are so excited to be here, and it's just going to be a great time.
Awesome.
So every love story is unique, and I think parts of your story are very relatable because we all are people with similar struggles, but then part of your story is unique. And so I don't know where we want to start with the backstory of what makes your love story unique, but maybe we'll start with you, Jennifer, of where you were at in your childhood that brought you to where you are today.
Every little girl, right, grows up with their image of what they think their life is going to be like. And there was a time in my life when I had my perfect relationship all paired out, when I'd get married, when I'd have children and all of that. But the reality is that those are ideas we have for ourselves, but they often don't match up with the plans that God has in store for us. I grew up in a pretty difficult situation in our home where I did not have a lot of strong role modeling for a strong relationship. And as a result of that, when I thought about my future life and what my family would look like in the future, I wanted to have a solid marriage like I didn't see around me until a little bit later into my growing up years. I wanted to be able to raise children as a mom who was more available than not. And so God began to plant a different kind of dream than the reality that I was growing up in. I would never have imagined that it would take 33 years to finally get to meet the man who I would marry not too long after that. But in the process, God continued to show himself faithful as my provider, the one who loved me more than any, and the one who was making plans that I could never have made for myself.
So before Craig came in the picture, you mentioned you were in your 30s at that point. What kept you occupied during all of your years of being single and in your 20s?
Well, I did date every now and again, but much of my life prior to that point is very similar to my life now. It was all about building community and drawing near to the people around me. I lived in community with girlfriends from college, and then after college, I worked and lived in community with friends there. I worked as a teacher for several years. And then when I went to seminary, once again, I lived in community with a group of 6 other people. And our life was spent learning how to live amongst one another. Some of my best days before meeting Craig were as a teacher in Boston, where most of the students did not come from Christian families. And so I had the ideal opportunity to teach kids about Jesus while teaching in a public school setting. It was really quite the opportunity. But in those years, God showed himself faithful in ways that almost are beyond description now, providing for me financially. I made less than the poverty level while I was a teacher. Any of your teacher listeners can relate to that probably to some degree. And yet I lived in a beautiful apartment in Boston with friends, never missed a bill, never missed a vacation or an opportunity to play and have fun. So I got to see all those years long before Craig how God reaches into our lives when we would allow him to and provides what we don't even know we need. And what I really needed during that season was friendship, relationship, community, connection, and he provided that in abundance.
Did you see in those community places better models of marriage maybe than you'd seen growing up then? Because you said growing up you didn't see many healthy models of marriage.
Absolutely. I mean, I was very blessed later in my teen years to be moved to my grandparents' home, and I saw in them the kind of marriage that I dreamed I would have one day. And it's funny, we have often joked that Craig is an awful lot like my grandfather, who really was the father who walked alongside me as I was growing up for most of the time. So I saw in them the quality of marriage that I wanted to live into. I also saw in my closest friends whose parents had strong marriages, where each other had a deepened sense of the uniqueness that their spouse had to contribute. And although their marriages weren't perfect, they were people who had a strong grounding in their own relationship with God, which impacted their relationship with each other. And until living with my grandparents, that's something I didn't observe. I didn't know how that worked. I didn't know what it looked like because that's not what I grew up with.
It's almost like you needed time once you were outside of your childhood home to learn what that looked like before Craig came along.
That is exactly right. And you know, a lot of times when we think about marrying someone, we hear that phrase, well, I haven't met the right person yet. I haven't met that special someone. I was 33 years old when I met Craig for the first time. And we would both tell you it's not about meeting the right person. It's about being the right person. And all those years of living in community and watching my friends' parents interact with one another, I believe all that was God's preparation for what would become our unique marriage.
Yeah, so Craig, while God's developing Jennifer, there are things going on in your life. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and what God was doing in your life leading up to the time that you met Jennifer.
So our family grew up in the church, and so I don't remember not going to church. And my dad was similar to me, his love languages in service, and so we were there early. We stayed late and fixing everything in the building and washing the dishes after the potlucks and all that. And something that I didn't learn until later in life, that God works in many different ways and the Holy Spirit speaks through us. And early in my life, it was just going to church and just doing the church thing.
More being at church, not developing a relationship with God.
Yeah.
So Craig, what did you learn from your family that impacted you as an adult?
I think the norms that we learned growing up, we assume we can take that into our new relationship, and it makes it really difficult for a couple to take those norms that we grew up with that doesn't really relate. Our background is Japanese, and things that our family used to do collide with our new relationship. And so we have to start building new norms that are more healthy.
And I'll bet Jennifer was a lot different than what you grew up with.
Yeah.
Like a norm, for example, in my family, even though I grew up in a difficult situation, we learned to show up. When you're supposed to be somewhere, you get there and you get there on time.
So our family and we more just want to hang out together. So if we get somewhere before 11 o'clock, it's a celebration where Jennifer's been waiting since 7 a.m. to go somewhere.
It's so true.
She just thinks we wasted the whole day away, but our families actually just enjoys hanging out together.
Which is not something I grew up with. If you're making plans, you make the plans, you get ready, you go out the door and you do it. Now, I have a great appreciation for that beautiful dynamic of Craig's family now, but it took a little getting used to because he's right. We would make plans to go out the door, and 3 hours later, we were headed out the door, and I'm already hungry and need to eat another meal again.
And I'm sure that showed up when you were parenting your own kids, too, of how much you let things just be in the moment and how much you say, no, we have to get moving.
Absolutely. And it's taken a little while for us to figure out that balance of how that works for us.
So in your 20s, as you're independent and maybe outside of your family, what were you hoping to get married? What were you looking for in a wife? What was your, again, vision of what that could be?
So living in Colorado, it's, you think everyone spends their vacation money to go to Colorado, and I'm already in Colorado. And so we had groups of friends, and we just always did things together. And I wasn't really thinking about dating someone and what happens next. It was really our groups just wanted to be together and do stuff. And that was our community. And then on top of that, serving the church, we had an amazing church community. They stretched me and learned how to serve God in different capacities that I didn't know I could and I didn't know existed.
So now we fast forward. You guys are in a place where your paths are crossing. What is your life like at that moment when you first met Jennifer?
I was in the back of the sanctuary running the soundboard and doing the slides for the video. Jennifer was sitting up front. She was in the front row below the pulpit, and she was serving her internship in our church, and she wanted to be like our pastor. She wanted to listen to every word, but we were at different places, and I knew that Jennifer was here for 3 months, and then she'd go off and do something amazing, and I'd still be at church.
What did you first notice about her besides she likes to sit in the front pew and listen really carefully?
Jennifer's a person that people look to follow, and she will lead gracefully. Sometimes she'll say, "Hey, let's go. Where are we going?" "I don't know. Let's go." I didn't have that in me. I wanted to see what it was like. And it was just...
What is it like? That's a great...
I think you got a little more than you bargained for.
So, Jennifer, he's noticing you in the front. Did you notice the sound guy in the back? When's the first time
Of course.
Did you notice him first?
I did. Anytime things broke down or stopped working or needed a small repair, here's what I noticed about Craig first. There were numerous times when the projector maybe didn't work, the bulb would go out or something. Just things like that are always happening. And he was very quiet about taking care so that other people could do their job or give their best. And so he was the guy in the background with the ladder, very quietly changing a bulb or maneuvering a slide so that the people he was serving were able to serve well. That's not something you see very often in people. And it was one of the first things I noticed about him was how carefully and quietly he was able to care for the people around him. I, on the other hand, not that I don't care for people, but I'm a step out on the stage. I'm fully present. I love the interaction with lots of people. The louder, the better. The more people, the better. And so here in front of me is this guy who quietly changes a light bulb to make sure that the rest of our church can worship. That was unique.
Now, that's something like I can see that blows you away. Did you recognize that at the time?
No, not really. I don't think so. I mean, I had noticed him, but we sort of joke now that our first 3 months together, we maybe said 5 words to each other. Okay. I said hello to him, sized him up as being very shy, and he would never ask me out. And he saw me and assumed, well, she's going to be a pastor, and she'll be blowing out of here, and I'll never see her again.
Is that right, Craig?
Yes.
And that kind of is what happened, right?
And that is kind of what happened. That's exactly right.
So how long did you know each other before you blew out of there?
Really only 4 months. And we were part of a very small group of young people. We were a couple of the singles who were included in this group.
Maybe
so it's hard
young,
not to...
Youngish.
Yes, we were youngish, and we were among just a few singles. So yes, we noticed each other. And to be quite honest, I think he's incredibly handsome. So who wouldn't notice him? We were gathering one night for small group Bible study, and he pulled out the guitar. Now, I didn't know at the time he knew barely any guitar. He was just getting started. But man, oh man, guitar was my love language. And I was like, oh, he plays the guitar.
Well, no, I didn't.
confessions. He doesn't play the guitar. He just looked really great with it. But anyway, he led us in a devotional. And I remember part of his devotional was reference to the footprints prayer, which was a prayer that I went back to a lot throughout my childhood, which, as I referenced, was not an easy one, was often very painful. But that poem was anchoring for me because where the people around me who theoretically should have carried me didn't. But God, from the early days of my faith, made it clear that he was the one who was carrying me. And then fast forward all these years later, and Craig is leading us in a Bible study and references this poem that has been so monumental in my own faith walk and journey. And it caught my attention. I remember going home that evening. I was, again, living in community with some friends, and I downloaded on my friend Julie about Craig and how he just had this amazing Bible study. And guess what? He used the Footprints poem.
And he's single.
And he plays guitar, which really he didn't, but it looked really good.
So let's fast forward a little bit. You end up going out of the country. How long did you spend outside the country?
When I graduated from seminary, I was granted a scholarship that allowed me to do either further study or ministry, whatever I designed. And so I decided to go to South Africa for a year to study racial reconciliation and worked with an organization called Learn to Earn. So I did a lot of coming alongside the staff who were there to help students with practical skills like baking and sewing, which is kind of ironic because I really don't sew much more than a button. But I loved being able to come alongside and equip students with practical skills that would allow them to employ themselves. So I lived there for a year and then had a couple of months of literally world travel where I and my backpack traveled all over places I never imagined this kid growing up as she did would be able to go. And then landed back in Colorado a little over a year later. It took quite a long time to search for a pastorate and discovered that most of the pastorates available for first-time pastors were in Illinois, not in Colorado, where I really desperately wanted to stay. But I came back and Craig was still here. Noticed him.
Right,
Yeah.
found him right where you left him.
He was still in the back of the church, caring for everybody, serving everybody as he had before. And I started dating someone else.
Oh, no.
I know, crazy. But that, as you can see, obviously did not work out. But in the meanwhile, our church held a number of events just trying to build community and get people together. And so our church had a hoedown, of all things, and we both happened to be at it. And I remember at one point I asked Craig if he wanted to dance.
Okay.
What'd you say,
And
Craig?
You had to
What'd
make
you
the first
say?
move.
I said, maybe not.
But a couple weeks later, I got an email from Craig asking, actually, did you call me or email me? I can't remember.
I emailed you. Yeah, to go
Okay.
to Taste of Colorado, and it didn't work out that Saturday, but we decided to do something else.
Yeah, a friend of mine was moving everything out of her home so they could build a second floor onto their home and asked if I would come help her move things out. Well, prior to that time, she had a friend that she set me up with, and we went out a couple times, and he was a wonderful guy. There just wasn't chemistry there, I guess. It just didn't work out. And so I had told her I wasn't interested in dating anyone and was getting ready to go help her pack her things up with her family. And then Craig sent me this invitation and he said, well, I have a truck. If you want help, I can help move on
He's got
Saturday.
a guitar and a truck.
I know. Pretty cool. He looks good, plays guitar, and has a truck. And she kind of chuckled as I said, well, I have this friend from church. His name is Craig. He's got a truck. He could help with moving. And would you mind if he came to join us? No, not at all. Bring him over.
Your first date was moving, basically.
So
But neither of you knew it was your first date, right?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
Those are fun moments when you're not dating, but you both are being intentional of saying we want to be in the same room at the same time.
Well, and it was tricky because I wasn't sure that Saturday when we were moving, that had a really funny part to it. The guy that I had been set up with when Craig came knocking on the door, he answered the door and was like, "Who are you?" And he wouldn't let him in. He was like, "Who is this guy?" Well, what did you say?
I said, I'm here to help out moving, and I'm a friend of Jennifer. And he's like, oh, okay.
I didn't know
And
this.
he wouldn't let him
He
in.
still didn't open the door.
So I come running up the stairs and I'm like, "Oh, come on in. Yeah, he's here with me." And we didn't really spend much time that day, but
About
we
2
did a lot
hours
of
later,
packing.
we saw each other.
How did you ever get the taste of Colorado from the email? Because you sent the email about...
So we ended up going on the Monday, a couple days after, and we had a great time.
You were alone. This was a date.
Well,
No?
we weren't really sure, right? He paid for everything. And I remember coming home to my friend Julie, and I told her I was beside myself. And I said, "Julie, I have just spent the day with my future husband." And I remember her asking me when he had first sent the email to ask if we could go to Taste of Colorado. I ran into the other room and I said, "Julie, Craig Sakata just asked me out. I think, I'm not really sure if it's a date, but I think he just asked me out." And she said, "Jennifer, your cheeks are all red. Do you like him?" I said, "Well, I don't really know, but I do know he's an incredible guy. And he just asked me to go do something."
So how long did the dating process last from this almost first date, don't quite know, until you were married
Or dating.
or dating?
Well, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks before we officially started dating. Craig had sent me another email. That was a lot of our communication in the early
Love it,
days.
Email dating.
He had sent me this beautiful email making note of our friendship and how much fun we had had together. And toward the end of the email, he said, "I'm wondering if there might be something more to this. What are your thoughts about that?" I
In an
didn't
email?
send anything back.
At least it gave you time to think about it.
It did. It gave me some time. But I was headed out of town very shortly after, and he had offered to take me to the airport. So I asked if we could talk about it then. I had no hesitation. That's the truth. But I didn't know what to do about it. I'm 33 years old. I've lived single this whole time, and this incredible man has just asked if there might be something more than friendship. What do I do with that?
How did you feel, Craig, with the silent response? Because that's a pretty big question to ask.
It wasn't a doubt. I think that I knew Jennifer loves to talk, so I think she just wanted to talk face to face. So it wasn't
Good call.
It wasn't anything to turn. It wasn't a turn off or anything. I guess when we did drive down to Colorado Springs. It was a crazy day. It was raining like crazy. We were going down the freeway, and I brought my laptop and showed her a bunch of pictures. Well, it was all my family pictures. I wanted her just to see what my family was. My parents grew up in Hawaii, so we have friends and family all over. And so it's not like the typical Illinois family where everyone lives within 5 miles of each other. I have family all over the West Coast, and most of our family is in Hawaii. So when people think about, oh, you went to Hawaii? Well, we went to Hawaii almost every summer to see our family. And so that's what I wanted to introduce her to.
And it was amazing. So if you were to look at our wedding album and you see my side of the family, you can see everyone's face very clearly. You know who everybody is. And then you flip over to the other side, to Craig's side of the family, and you wish it was on an Apple phone where you could magnify it and make it bigger, because there's so many people on his side of the family. You could barely see people's faces. And so he's introducing me to his family with literally hundreds and hundreds of pictures during this hour-and-a-half drive from Denver down to the Springs. And I saw in those pictures something I didn't have. Not just a large family, but in those pictures, it was clear there were generations and a legacy of having bonded together, committed together, and loved together to create this incredible man.
Even across geography.
Yes, they weren't just neighbors. They were literally oceans apart from one another. And so that really caught my attention. That's like nothing I had ever seen before.
When I met Tara's family and had a similar experience, she doesn't have the size family that Craig does, but this idea of this is what normal looks like. This is what healthy relationships look like. For me, it was exhilarating on one hand, but it was heartbreaking on the other, because it really brought to light it made me more aware of what I'd lost. Was that your experience as well?
For sure. There was a lot of that. And in our early years of marriage, that was especially significant because as I entered our marriage, I viewed myself, if you will, as the identified patient. I was the one who came with all the baggage and all the brokenness and all the parts and pieces that didn't seem to fit anywhere. So I viewed myself as the more fragile one, where I saw Craig and his family and the strength of so many and the built-in community and the generations of stability and courage and all the things that I wish that I'd had. And the problem that created for us was that I had him up on a pedestal while I had myself down in the dumps. And as you both know, every marriage is the union of two broken people who bring their own baggage. Some may be more obvious than others, but it took the first few years of our marriage for me to be able to put aside this sort of perfect family image of Craig's and this completely broken and difficult image of my own family. Because the truth is, we both came with things that we needed to work through. So it was pretty impacting.
Immediate differences that showed up in everyday life as newly married, independent people with these preconceived ideas.
I think we would stumble on the other has to fill in for what we don't have.
That's good.
And instead of turning to God, it was, well, why can't you just do that? And it just made it difficult. And we expected it because we knew what each other could do. That's what brought us together. We wanted to experience that. But then when you expect the other person to do it, it doesn't lead to good things.
Well, also, since we both were fully grown adults, if you will, we were both in our 30s, we both had well-developed ideas of what it looks like to be an adult person. And so when you have two fully grown adult people trying to merge life, not just on paper into one, but literally, physically, mentally, spiritually into one, that is a recipe for some pretty interesting fireworks.
We are individual people, but marriage does require kind of interdependence. Did you want the dependence, or did you want to keep your individualness?
No, that I would say that was very difficult for us, honestly. I think we both wanted it, but we didn't know how to get there. One of the discoveries we made more recently is that when I was growing up, taking care of myself and becoming an individual was a survival skill. For Craig, learning how to care for himself and to be independent, that was a life skill that his parents taught him. And so we both came to independence from a very different perspective. Mine was from survival. His was from life skill. And so my expectations, my thoughts about who he would be and how he would be were, well, there were times when those expectations became toxic for us. Similarly, the expectations that he had of me being able to be or do things that I had never learned to do were difficult.
Do you have an example for that, Craig?
I think I saw some of the things that Jennifer was working on, and I felt like I had to be the person that fixes it. And maybe that works once in a while, but it can't always work because then we're just dependent on each other, and then God just drops out. It's like we don't even need God anymore. And then your relationship just kind of collapses.
Were you able to recognize that at the time? Or was it like you were just spinning your wheels trying to figure it out as you were going?
Yeah, it felt like we couldn't identify it, but it's something that when things were getting rough, we would just expect that from the other person. And we wanted to be the answer for the other person. And I think in a healthy relationship, it can be a gift, but in a difficult relationship, we were feeling like the other person needed to be our completer.
How did that show up in your relationship with God? You both came in with a decently strong relationship with God, but now you hit marriage and you had all these expectations, but things aren't going the way that you thought they would go. How did that impact your individual relationship with God?
You used the image of spinning, Joe, just a couple moments ago, and I think that was a terrific image because even our relationship with God was spinning because our expectations of each other were unreasonable, unrealistic, not to be met. And rather than halting that process and turning to God to allow Him to redefine what those expectations should look like, we just kept, white knuckling it, trying to work harder instead of work smarter. We spent a lot of our first years of marriage pushing through, when had we paused and stepped back to invite God into the process more with us, we would have had a very different outcome. We especially saw that when our children came along.
So you didn't have much time to pause. Because
We didn't.
How soon did children come along?
Within 2 years, if we had not been as old as we were when we got married, I wish we could have been married longer to work through some of those things we've now learned 17 years later.
We don't always have that.
But
that
we
option.
did not have that option. We did want to start a family and have children, and even that process was a bit stressful for us. It was difficult for us to conceive, and there was stress that was part of that. Wait, this isn't the dream that I had. And as much as I thought I had let go of that,
Your different reactions to stress. I'm assuming this, but like processing stress.
for sure. Stress, let me just
How do
push
you-
on through it.
And Craig, how do you react or process when things around you are uncontrollable or out of your control?
I do push on through, but I don't stop to talk about it. It just becomes
Just fix the light,
Yeah,
get
it's
in the
just
ladder.
my mission to go where Jennifer expresses her feelings more and it gets loud, but
It's true.
she also plows through. I mean, we're both hard workers, but like Jennifer said, the smarter way is probably to pause, talk about it, and come up with a plan, pray about it, see where God is going to lead us instead of us just deciding where we're going to go.
I also wonder, I think none of us are in the perfect place to have kids, right? None of us, if we waited for that, we would never have kids. But I remember Jim Gaffigan, he's a comedian, said one time, he was talking about having lots of children, but when you have stress and you have things going on, he says, it's like you're drowning and someone hands you a child.
Yes!
So I can imagine.
right. Trying to stay above water here.
The child coming along brought its own level of stress into things that, because you were not even in a place where you were able to work those things out first. And now, how was that when the children started to arrive?
Well, I think a lot of what we did is we put our us on hold, as a lot of parents do. I mean, there is no competition, right? You have a 3-week-old who can do absolutely nothing for himself, and then you have a spouse who is an adult. Well, there's no question about where your attention will go, where your focus is going to go. It's going to go to that 3-year-old child. And at that time, relatively newly married, we still didn't have very well developed communication skills with one another. I was not at a place to be able to say, Craig, I am so exhausted and worn out. I just need to take a nap. Can you cover for me? That seems like such a simple statement to be able to make, but the truth is it took us a lot of years of marriage
But
to
sometimes
be able
he
to
would-
ask for what we needed.
Sometimes he would help without your asking, and that wouldn't always go over very well.
Well,
either.
yes, that's true. That's
Like,
true.
we can't win here. Like,
I know, and that's the truth. Where there were times he just couldn't win. He would do everything he should be doing, but reaching back to things in my own past, my own interpretation of what his actions did or didn't mean, all the little meta messages that I carried with me. We had a 3-week-old child in front of us, so there was no time to be sifting through what is fact versus fiction.
what's some of those things you interpreted him saying to you that you misinterpreted?
Well, for example, this was a little after our kids had been grown, but by this time I had resigned my pastorate, and so I was home full time raising our kids. And he would come home and he would start folding the laundry. Well, I had been doing laundry, dishes, trying to take care of our kids, keep everybody fed. And to me, that felt like I was a failure. That was never his intention. That's not what he was trying to tell me. He was trying to be helpful, and he needed some decompressed time from work himself. But to me, because I came from a place of survival, I have to do it myself. If I'm not doing it myself, then I have failed. And so when he came home to start folding laundry, to me, it felt like, you've let me down. You didn't take care of the laundry. You didn't get the dishes done. The dinner table's not ready. Now, he never said those things to me, and he never meant them. But my own baggage made it hard for me to see what God was actually doing right in front of me. So it was quite a few years later, I would say, after our kids were quite a bit older, that I could step back and recognize the beauty of the servant-hearted husband that I had seen up on the stage, changing light bulbs for the projector and doing what he could do to make life better, easier. It took a lot of years for me to be able to see that.
And I think at that time, we also, when we were deep into it, we didn't have good communication skills. And so it would come out as, why are you doing this? What do you think of me? As opposed to now we've got to the place where we can actually stop and say, oh, that's something I'd like to do. Can I do it? And instead of me just jumping in and doing stuff, we can talk about it. That we can say, this is something I'd like to help out with. Is that okay? Stopping and talking about it first makes so much more sense now for both of us.
Learning that you can't read each other's minds is actually, for us, that was a good thing when we officially learned that we couldn't read.
So you mentioned, on one hand, wanting to help each other, and Craig, especially for you, wanting to be of service and fix things. But then some things happen in your life that you can't fix and you can't make better, because you guys encountered quite a tragedy early into your marriage as well. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. We were married just about 7 years, and we had by then conceived our fourth child. We had lost our very first, and then we had 2 living children, the sons that are with us now, and then we were pregnant, and we were beyond thrilled. We had talked about having another child. Craig was not so sure that was going to be the greatest idea, because it was a little bit of chaos.
Just a little bit.
Well, it was a lot of chaos, let's be truthful. But I just had this sense that our family wasn't complete yet. And then when we found out that I was pregnant with the son we named Agape, I said to him, even before we went to our first sonogram, when I showed him the little stick, I said, our family is all together now. So we waited several weeks, and then we went for my first appointment where we should have heard a heartbeat, and we didn't. But all the rest of the signs were there that I was pregnant. And our midwife said, why don't you come back in another week? We'll try again. Sometimes it takes a little while. I remembered saying to Craig and to our midwife, I just want to hear the heartbeat. Now I look back and I wish I'd asked for more. But we did go back the following week, and we heard the most beautiful heartbeat, our baby boy. But just as instantaneously, having already birthed 2 healthy kids, the heartbeat was really slow. And I immediately turned to our midwife and I said, Mary, that's a really slow heartbeat, isn't it? She said, well, that is a little unusual. We'll come back and we'll check again. And I had another appointment 2 weeks after that. And just before that appointment, I already knew what a mama who's lost her baby typically knows, that he had already gone home to be with Jesus. So I went to the appointment where we did not hear, actually, we both went to that appointment where we did not hear a heartbeat, and just grieved the loss of the child we knew had completed our little circle of Sakatas. And even though we haven't been able to hold him, he's still a Sakata boy, and he will always be a Sakata boy. We just won't get to meet him for a little while yet.
So was that grieving process different for both of you? And was your communication better to explain what you both were feeling?
I think it benefited us that we were there together for those appointments. For me, it was just a feeling of emptiness. It's like you see the finish line and then all of a sudden the road disappears. For me, it was just not knowing where to go next at that point.
I don't know that we had the wisdom to understand it then. This would be a few years later, but we did handle that grief very differently, simply as a man and a woman, but also our personalities are very different. We've always handled grief very differently. And so my expression of grief is to go into it and to feel the feels and to struggle with the struggles and to ask the hard questions and yell out loud if I need to yell out loud. Did you reach out
to friends and family as well?
We did. That's a beautiful part of our story. Actually, the moment we found out we were pregnant, we celebrated with our grow group, but we did know there was a potential for a problem. Like I said, when the heartbeat was so slow, we decided to reach out to our Bible study, but we didn't broadcast, but we did reach out to them. And I'm so glad that we did, because that group of people, they walked in the celebration with us, Shortly after we heard the heartbeat, we had a baby shower and we had a cake and we had little booties, which we still have, and we fully celebrated. But we also were honest with them about the fact that this pregnancy was precarious and that his heartbeat was slower than it should be, and we didn't know what would happen in the next couple of weeks. And so we invited this group of people to pray with us through it, and we prayed. And then when we knew we had lost him, they were the front line of people that we reached out to in our grief. So for me, that grief looked like reaching out to the people in that group. For Craig, grief was quieter. It took a different expression.
It takes me a while to feel things, I guess.
Could I ask a quick question? Does it take you a while to feel things, or does it take you a while to express the feeling of those things?
Yeah, that's probably a better
Find the words
way.
to match the feelings.
Well, because you had said earlier, it left you empty. You expressed some of the things that you were feeling, and I can imagine walking through something like that, it would feel pretty heavy right away, but being able to express those feelings
Yeah, to
takes
put
time.
words to it, for it to even, get from my brain to my heart. And it happens slower. The process happens slower. And so I can function for a while, but I'm ignoring it all. And then it just hits me like a ton of bricks.
Well, and while he's processing quietly, I'm processing out loud in my words and expecting him to have words to speak, words of comfort. I'm a words person. He's a service person. And so our beautiful two love languages clashed pretty hardly in those first few years. When the anniversary dates would come around, I would wait for him to say something.
Say words.
And when he didn't say something to me, any words of comfort or acknowledgement, I took that as if he didn't care or that he forgot. None of that was true, but it took a little while to recognize our way of grieving is very different, not one better than another, but we needed to make room for each other's way of grieving.
Yes, I wonder what else you would tell couples who had experienced this kind of loss, how you do stay together when you don't have that communication skills, you're both weak. Would you tell yourself something different now, knowing what you know, what you've walked through?
I would. I wish I had thought to do more journaling that then I could offer to Craig to read on his own when he was ready to read it. Because sometimes when we are having a conversation, the words put him on the spot. And so, as he just shared, he could use the time to process. And I wish I had the wisdom to get my words out in a form that I could then share with him in a way that he could process in his own way, in his own time. Now we have that, but we didn't have that wisdom then. So if I could go back, that's one thing I would have done differently.
So I think before we really didn't talk things through. We told each other. And it made it more of, well, you don't do it the right way. You don't do it my way. And I always used to think, well, it works for me. Why doesn't it work for you? And now we are talking things through and understanding that we do things differently, and we can ask each other for help instead of requiring the other person to fill in.
When the anniversaries come around, instead of assuming that he doesn't care or that he's forgotten, what I will say instead, if I haven't heard acknowledgement and I feel the need of it, I will just ask him, hey, did you notice today is April 9th? Yeah, that's our day. So it's an invitation for him to care for me without requiring that he read my mind and care for me in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense to him right away.
And it's asking you to assume with the right tone.
100%.
Didn't you notice?
Yes. Those are
Didn't you
two different
notice?
things. That's true.
Not assuming you didn't, but I noticed this today.
Well, and I would say that's another thing. Right. We've been married 17 years. So looking back, I wish we had spent more time working on seeing the positive in one another rather than assuming the negative. So in those early days of having lost our son, I assumed that he didn't remember or that he didn't care, rather than assuming he's the father of our son, just like I'm the mother of our son. And he loved and loves our son just as much as I do.
It might look different.
Yes.
It's hard to
But
understand.
because we do it differently, it's easy to make the assumption that it's not happening. And so going back, I wish that we had worked harder at giving each other the benefit of the doubt.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about grace a lot. And Jennifer, I know that you speak and write a lot about grace. And sometimes we talk about these things, we still have a hard time putting it in practice, even we know what the truth is. For you, what does it look like to offer that grace in those times? Like what goes through your head when you're having that war between grace and judgment?
I think we always need to go back and remind ourselves that we can let things go and not to hold tightly to the way we used to do things. And that grace card needs to come out more often, where it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to mess up sometimes. And like you said, we are all broken, and that's all right. And so, yeah, grace is definitely something that needs more capital letters than...
That's so great. I love that.
Yeah.
On the way over here, I was thinking about a scene from, I think it's the movie Overcomer. It's this story of a well-known basketball coach, and the town is going through tremendous financial hardship, and many of the families move away. And the principal of the school essentially reassigns him from being a basketball coach to being a cross-country coach. And he doesn't even think cross-country is a sport, and he's upset and has all the things going on in him about his own identity and all the rest. And there is a scene early on in the movie where the main character and his wife are having a drag-out fight. I mean, I don't remember exactly the details, but it has a lot to do with his own insecurity and having to reassess his identity. And they are both going at it. And to be clear, neither of them is in the right. But as I'm watching the scene unfold, I'm like, why is he being so pig-headed? He's kind of being a jerk. And I'm siding with her, right? Because, we women, we sidle up with each other. And I'm like, why is he so mean to her? And in the middle of the scene, she stops and she pulls up her chair in front of him. I guess they had separated for a little while. He'd gone out on the patio. She was doing her thing. And she went to where he was and she pulled up a chair on the patio. And she said, hey, sometimes I don't have the best way of expressing myself. And I really don't always know how to love you well. And I'm really sorry. I think about that scene a lot in terms of our marriage, because you have to decide whether it's more important to be right or to be made right. And that's the work that God does. God is the one who makes us right. And 17 years in, we've learned a little bit about pushing the pause button on our conflict and our anger or our blame or our criticism, and welcoming the God who makes us right individually to then make us right as a couple.
And once you're right as a couple, sometimes you stop caring about being right.
Right. It's like you forget, what are those things?
Why was I fighting so hard for that one?
Yes. It's so silly. It's so ridiculous. But it's because in that moment, we wanted to be right more than we wanted to be made right. I love being married to this man. And a big part of our journey is moving from, I want to be right, to let's be made right.
Well, your story's not over yet, so we can't ask you the end of the story.
Right.
You still have a lot of years in front of you.
Yeah.
So we're kind of catching you midstream, what you've been through and where you are now. And again, what God's doing in your marriage will be different in 5 years from now.
And I think we have to grow. You had said something earlier, Jennifer, about how you wish you could go back and tell your younger self and fix those things. But you know those things today because your younger self had to walk through that. And so what I think is even more beautiful is the way that you both have applied these things that you've learned, not just to the relationship with each other, but to your relationship with your kids and your relationship ultimately with God, saying, hey, I don't have to be right. I need to be made right. And that's a completely different outlook. And one of the things that you said was, I wish I could have assumed the positive over the negative. And that's exactly what that does. It puts you in that frame of mind to say, I'm going to assume the positive here.
So Jennifer, assuming the positive right now, we're going to assume that you're not negative. What makes you smile when you think about your husband?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, there are several things actually, but the first thing that comes to mind is words that a wise sage told Craig early on in our marriage. He's now passed on to glory to be with Jesus. Do you remember what Yoke said to you all those years back?
Tell your wife, I love you every single day.
It was a beautiful space. And he does tell me that he loves me every day. But what makes me especially smile are those random texts he will send me during the day. And it's simple, just 3 words. Hi, period. Love you, period. And to anybody else, that might seem like nothing.
Not much romance there.
I know. Well, right. Okay.
Not many words.
Not many words. But he's not a words person. And so the fact that he would stop in the middle of his day because he knows that I am a words person and that he would send me those 3 precious words. And I can't tell you how many times those words come when I really need to be reminded that I'm not alone. And not only am I not alone, but that we're in this together and that he loves me, even though he doesn't have to. He loves me because he chooses to. So that makes me smile. And then I would also say when I look up and watch him playing with our kids or the neighbor kids outside, that literally, like the day he picked up the guitar before we started dating, it melts my heart because there is such depth of love there. And it does make me smile.
All right, Craig, I'm going to put you on the spot. What makes you smile about Jennifer?
Well, there's so many things, but one thing in particular recently is that Jennifer's been leading our children's worship service, and the kids get so excited to watch her. This last Sunday, she dressed up in a white coat to do some experiment, and I walked in and I went, wow. That's pretty neat.
Was it real chemicals?
No, they were not. They looked good, though.
And we go out to the restaurant or we go grocery shopping and we run into these kids and like, oh, I'm Mrs. Sakata. And I have no clue who they are, but they are excited because she relates to them and they know that she is safe. Mm-hmm. And it's just exciting to see just people in our community that they're following her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me smile.
I just thought about something really cool, Jennifer, in the way that God gives us gifts that we don't always expect, right? In the sense of the way that you grew up not having that safe person, that God has put you in a place where you can be that for other children. That's amazing. It's really cool.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for saying that. It's what Scripture talks about, right? Redeeming, that God redeems. He does that all the time. And I remember our pastor when she, during our wedding, she made a comment that captured my attention then and still does today. But she talked about how marriage has a unique capacity to work backwards, to bring healing. That's a powerful reality. That is the substance of God's redemptive work, that he takes where we come from. He sees it clearly, more clearly than we do. And then he works his grace, his mercy, his patience, his kindness, his compassion. He literally marinates all of that into the substance of our relationship, and out comes this beautiful gift that neither of us could ever have put together on our own, or even asked for, to be quite frank. And so it becomes the thing that we didn't have.
So Jennifer, you said you have a lot of words.
Yes.
No shortage of words, and you like to use those words. Tell me a little about what you like to do with all your words besides talk to your husband.
I do. And he's become much more of a conversationalist in the last many
years. That's right. We can joke about our quiet husbands, Jennifer. It's cool.
Yes, I have many words. There are quite a few proverbs that talk about the wisdom of having few words. I have memorized quite a few of those. So I have a ministry of living the grace life. Real grace for your real life. We've all heard about grace and we know we need grace, but we don't always know what grace looks like and sounds like in the middle of an argument with your husband or when your kids are running you ragged and you're exhausted and you don't know how to ask for help. And so what I love doing is coming alongside Do More women. You know, those women like me who are very active, full-plated, running from this place to another, have a very busy day and schedule, and encouraging and equipping women to slow down. Because it's in the slow that we can receive God's grace for ourselves. and then be equipped to give God's grace to those around us. So I am very excited to have been published in 4 devotional books. Most recently, I was published in a devotional put out by Redemption Press called Trusting God, 31 Days, 31 Women, 31 Stories, One God. And they're all stories about how in difficult places in our lives, we have chosen to trust God and how God has been faithful and held true. And so I love being a part of these devotional books because they cover a broad variety of people's life experience. But the one piece we all have in common is the grace of God that allows us and helps us to move one step at a time. So I write a lot about grace. I have a website. I am very excited to be launching my own podcast in the spring called Living the Grace Life Podcast. My website is jennifersakata.com. And if you are interested in any of those devotionals, you can email me at jennifer@jennifersakata.com, and I'd be happy to get one of those to you.
I will be happy to put that in the show notes if you want to hear more from Jennifer and how to live a grace-filled life.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I love your willingness to share your story. I know that there will be many listening that were encouraged today, as I was. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
This was amazing. Thank you, guys.
Behind Our Smiles is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.